Hello, scholars. Welcome to EDUC 2400 Section 30I for the summer semester 2022 at Southern Utah University. I am Dr. Brenda Juarez Harris, and I will be your guide and your helicopter professor for our learning adventure together this summer. A little side note about myself. I'm coming to you from Southern Alabama, home sweet home Alabama, Mobile specifically, Mobile, Alabama. And I am in the process of moving to Cedar City. So I will actually make that transition this summer, and I'm super excited about that. If you don't have any experience or background with people from the deep south or even from the south in general, you may not know that it is oftentimes our habit to address people with terms of respect such as ma'am, sir, Mr., Ms., Doctor. And I thought about this recently when I watched the movie that Will Smith recently starred in called King Richard. It's the story of Venus and Serena Williams' rise to sports stardom. And in the video, as Will Smith's character Richard Williams is introducing his daughters to their new coach, the coach says, "Hi, I'm Marty," or whatever his name is, and just call me Marty. And Richard Williams, Serena and Venus's father, says, "No, you are Mr. So-and-so." And he insists that his daughters call their coach Mr. So-and-so. And that's really how it is here in the South. People will think that you have no home training if you address someone who is older by their first name without putting Miss in front of it. So with the children in my neighborhood, I'm always Miss Brenda. With students, I'm Dr. Harris or Doc. So it's a little different. I graduated from the University of Utah with my first bachelor, or not my bachelor's degree. I graduated from Brigham Young University with my bachelor's degree, but I did my first master's degree at the University of Utah, and then also my doctorate I did at the University of Utah. And my professors were always Andrew, Bob, Dave, Julie. So I didn't learn to do that, to use the titles until I came to the South. And now it's become kind of a way that I do things. And so if I do that to you and I call you Mr. Rick or Mr. Wagstaff or Miss Julie or Miss Smith, please don't be offended. It's just that I've spent the last 20 years in the Deep South, and it's just a way of interacting that I have developed, and I mean no disrespect by it. I don't expect you to follow that. Just know that it's coming from a place of respect if I do that to you. Some people are offended because if they're not used to it, they might think that I'm inferring that they are old, although I don't know what's wrong with being old. It happens to all of us. We spend most of our life being old and older, but that's beside the point. Anyway, please don't be insulted. I don't mean it as an insult. It's just a habit of interacting that I've developed out of years of living in the South. So that's just a little bit about me. So I'm looking at the hard copy of the syllabus, and my goal for this video is to overview for you a little bit about what's coming up on our course and our journey together. We will learn with and from each other. And it is my strong belief that if I'm not learning from you, you're likely not learning from me. So I will not be the only one teaching in this course. You will be sharing your presence and your experiences, and we will all be learning from each other as well. So I'm looking at the syllabus, and you will see I put a piece of artwork by my dear friend Dr. Corita Mayfield there about hope. I think hope and joy are very important, and they should be important parts of successful teaching and learning as well. And then I also put a quote here that I really want you to think about as we start our learning journey together in a course called School, Society, and Diversity. Those three components coming together have historically not worked very well together. But as an educator, I know that I personally did not go into education because I wanted to wreck anyone's dreams. I love teaching and learning. I love education. And so when I went into education to become a school teacher, I went into it because I wanted to be a dream keeper, not a dream wrecker. And I'm sure that's true with you as well, is that you're hoping to become a dream keeper, not a dream wrecker. So I'm looking at the syllabus here, and the quote that I have on the opening page 1 of our syllabus, it says, "Nothing more dangerous than a school teacher." And this is a quote from Seth in Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. I don't know if you've read that novel before, but it's very famous. Her novel, Beloved. Nothing more dangerous than a school teacher. School teacher beat 60 anyway to show him that definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. Okay, that's also from the book Beloved. I was about to turn around when I heard school teachers say, No, that's not the way. I told you to put her human characteristics on the left and her animal characteristics on the right. And don't forget to line them up." That's also a quote from the novel Beloved on page 19. Okay, so we think about school teacher and why school teachers are so dangerous. And we should come back to this as we go throughout our journey. You will, I hope, have something to say about what the characters mean when they talk about that school teacher beat 60, one of the students, to show him that definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. Okay, that's a very important distinction there. All right, so we'll just leave that, but I want you to ponder that and think about that often as we go throughout our learning journey, and we're looking at how do school, society, and diversity come together. How have they come together in the past, and what will they do coming together in your classroom? What can you do about that? If you're not coming into education to be a dream wrecker, you want to be a dream keeper, then it's very important that you are very intentional about these relationships between schools, diversity, and society. Okay? So we'll come back to that as we move forward. I'm turning to page 2 in the syllabus, and I want you to really, really look closely. I put a lot of time and effort into this syllabus, and there's a section on the top of page 2 called Land Acknowledgement. And it says, "It is important to acknowledge that Southern Utah University is located on the ancestral lands of the Southern Paiute peoples, past and present, and to honor the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through the generations. This land acknowledgement calls us to commit to continuing to learn how we too may each be even better stewards of the land we inherit as well. Okay? So I want you to think about that. My own people, my background is Irish, Danish, English, but from the time that they've been in the United States, my people came west with the dominant religious group in Utah. And my people were people who were considered by the Shoshone peoples to be squatters. So my family was part of the people who were considered squatters on Ute lands in what is today Utah County. And the Utes, different bands of Utes were vigorously defending their lands, and my people came and were part of that era. And so Southern Utah University has a unique history as well, and it is sitting on ancestral lands. And so we have a responsibility to think about how we interact. It's not about saying there are good people, bad people. I had no choice in what was happening generations or even years or days before I was born, or even as I was a child growing up. But I do have some ability to think about my thinking and my actions and interactions right now. I have choices that I make about how I interact. And it's not particularly useful to think about, some people are bad people, other people are good people, or things like white guilt, things like that. They usually tend to paralyze people and stop actions, where it's much more useful to think about, what can I do in my sphere of influence? I can't change what happened in the past or what people did in the past, but I can change what I do. I can think about my thinking. I can act in ways that are inclusive and promote the dignity of all peoples. So I think we have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity at Southern Utah University to do just that, and to think about and learn more about where we are with the ancestral home of the Southern Paiute tribes. Right now in Alabama, I actually live in a city called Mobile, and the Mobile Indians no longer exist. However, I'm a short ways away from where the Chickasaws were, and that was a very, very strong tribe, and the peoples are not past. They have a strong history in Alabama, and they were on the trail where they were pushed out of Alabama by President Andrew Jackson. However, they have survived and are very resilient, and we have many indigenous peoples right here in Lower Alabama as well. So we can think about that and be cognizant of what is around us wherever we are. Florida is just about a half an hour drive from where I live, and the Seminole tribe actually never was defeated by the United States government and its military. So there's a rich, rich history all around us. We have nothing to lose by learning more about where we are and the rich histories and peoples around us. So we have that to think about in our course with schools, diversity, and society. All of those things come together. Okay, so I'm going to look on the syllabus, our course overview on page 3. I'm not going to read this to you line by line because I know that you're capable readers. Okay, but I do want you to think about how this course draws on an interdisciplinary framework, okay? So interdisciplinary means that we're going to be drawing from math, we'll be drawing from science, we'll be drawing from art, from the humanities. I often like to use poetry because I feel that poetry often, in just a few words and a few stanzas, will often capture great magnitudes of ideas that in a textbook take chapters and chapters to write out. They may be these huge volumes, and a poem can sometimes say it in 2 or 3 lines. So you'll see that I like to use interdisciplinary. I like the arts, I like stories. Human beings, we're geared to learn through stories, and so stories are useful ways of learning too. Different forms of art, paintings, music, dance, science. I think science is very rich with creativity and resiliency and ingenuity. So we're going to use interdisciplinary. So I would encourage you to think in a very interdisciplinary way. Okay? And we will not be looking at a both ands perspective. Now, you might think, whoa, Dr. Harris, what are you doing? We're not going to look at a both ands in a so-called equal opportunity balanced perspective. And the reason that I don't do that is because to have a both and perspective, that means that you're already on an equal playing field. And we, as you will explore in our course with school, society, and diversity, our society is not and has never been equal. So women, for example, are still today breaking glass ceilings. They're still paid less on the dollar for the same work and with the same qualifications as men do. So this doesn't mean that by me acknowledging that I hate people who are gendered and identify as male or men. No, it just means I'm acknowledging that the playing field is not level. And so when we're looking at a course about school, society, and diversity, and we know that there's been a lot of inequities, then we're not suggesting that both sides are equal. We're looking at why and how the inequities have happened, but we're not saying, well, these are bad people, those are good people. Human beings, we're way too complex for that. And if you look at any form of organized religion, whether it's Islam, whether it's any form of Christianity, whether it's Buddhism, you almost always see this yin-yang sort of a thing where you have good and evil tied together. They're connected. And so we often think about human beings as that too. What are our interests? What's going on? What are the antecedents? And you will often see positive and negative even in one human being within a stretch of an hour. So it's not going to be for us that we're like gonna say, well, these people are bad and these people are good. We're gonna say that human beings are way too complex for that kind of a simplistic binary, and none of us are so well developed that we don't make errors. So we're much too complex for that kind of good bad sort of a thing. Okay, now going back to page 3 on our syllabus, the Department of Teacher Education in our college at Southern Utah University, it's very important that you know that the stance of the teacher education faculty, including myself as a newcomer, we decry inequity and injustice in our educational system and greater society. And usually education and our schools are a microcosm of larger society. So what you see happening in schools is a reflection of and reflects what's happening in larger society. So they're just a smaller version of it. And so at Southern Utah University and the teacher education faculty, I was so honored to be invited to join the faculty. And one of the things that I was so honored about was because this is a committee, a department, a school, a community, a faculty that is truly dedicated to ameliorating injustice and inequity. Okay? We commit to developing and nurturing educators who value all people in the communities they serve. That's the beautiful thing about public education. In private institutions, you get to choose. You get to say, we will take you, we won't take you. But in public, it's for all, the all. And so our mission in teacher education is to be preparing educators who are prepared to teach all. And that means that we have to address the historical inequities. Okay, such professional educators will act as agents of change, advocates for equity and justice in their schools and community, and embolden students to do the same. Education is very powerful. It's very dangerous. It's dangerous in the sense that when people have a sense of their capacity to use knowledge and their skills and abilities in the world, they can really do beautiful things. So it can be dangerous if the status quo is the inequities that are happening in society. If you're a protector of those inequities, it could be dangerous for you in the sense that things are about to change. And it's a beautiful, dangerous thing, because once you let the power of people's creativity and ingenuity go, you don't know what kind of beautiful things are going to be produced. So I really think about the power of education as this freedom dreams. When Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, was an enslaved child, he used to wonder at when the children of his owners, they would come home with their little school books and they would be learning to read, and they had their little primers, and he was very curious about this. And his mistress, his owner's wife, was from the north, and she didn't know that she wasn't supposed to teach enslaved people to read and write. And so she saw that little Frederick, was really quick to pick up on things, and so she started teaching him some alphabet letters and how to put the sounds together, and he was so eager to learn. And so one day his owner came home and saw his wife working with this very bright, creative young black child, and he was just livid. He was angry, and he screamed at his wife that you should never ever teach a slave to their letters to read, because it ruins slaves. And of course it would ruin them, because they would understand that the world is a big place and that knowledge is powerful. And so they had laws against, and you could be killed for learning to read and write if you were enslaved chattel. And so at that point, Frederick was pretty small, and he saw how angry his owner got, and he was like, this is some powerful business here with this literacy stuff. And so, but he had learned enough that he was in Maryland, and even though his mistress stopped teaching him, he was able to look. This was in Maryland by the harbor, and he saw the boats, and they would have letters on the side of the boats, and he would trace them, and he knew that they were letters, and he would ask people what it would say, and he started cobbling together like what words were. He got a vocabulary. There would be scraps of newspaper flying around on the ground, and he would pick them up and put them together. And so he finished teaching himself how to read. And he became so good at it that as an adult, and when he had run away from slavery and freed himself, he would give speeches and write speeches and be this great orator. And people would say, well, how can you possibly have been a slave? Because you're so articulate and you're such a bright thinker. But he knew that the power of education was the way to freedom, and that was his freedom dream. And so you, as an educator, have this same capacity to unlock this powerful force of knowledge as joy, as opportunity. And not all children get it. And so that's, one of the beautiful things about being a dream keeper if you're in education. So one of the things that the Department of Education says, we are trying to develop educators who, and I'm on page 3 now, educators who are academically competent in the subjects they teach. Obviously, right? If you're going to teach social studies, if you're going to teach math, you need background knowledge in that. You have to be competent in that. That's kind of obvious. You should have this is number 2, you should have a broad background in general education and appreciate the value of liberal arts and sciences. Okay, so that's kind of that interdisciplinary framework, right? We live in a knowledge society. It's not just packing knowledge into your head, but it's being able to be a troubleshooter, to be a problem solver, to be able to use what you know to apply it to new things, all this higher order thinking skills, not just to be able to memorize some facts and spit them back out, but to actually be able to think. That's the skills of the 21st century, right? So that's you, number 2. Number 3, you should have a working knowledge of the historical and philosophical foundations of education. Why do we have schooling in the United States? Thomas Jefferson was a big proponent of public schooling. They called it the common schools. And when it was first set out, it wasn't intended for me. It wasn't intended for people who were identified as female. They got a certain kind of learning, yes. A certain kind of learning about how to be good housekeepers, things like that, for people who were gendered and identified as female. If you were not identified as male and a landowner, you weren't necessarily slotted to be learning math and science or other kinds of literature and philosophy either. So there was only a certain group, but the whole idea of a republic was that you needed to have an informed citizenry, right? How is the public going, how are citizens going to be able to debate their issues and make decisions that inform the government as a republic if they are not able to be informed? So you see where school, society, and diversity comes in here, right there, right? Schools, you need an informed citizenry for a republic. This is our form of government, is a republic. I'm not talking about Republican, Democrat, as in political parties that you think about today, but our form of government as a republic. Okay, so the idea was that schools were going to level the playing field, and we could have Horace Mann saw as schools as being the great equalizer, and so everybody had to have a little bit of schooling at least. And long before it was 12 years and before high schools were invented, it was only just a couple years, maybe 3 years of free schooling. And it was certainly not intended for people who were identified as not white. So even in the Constitution, if you were identified as indigenous, they had a word for you, and they even wrote it in, and they used the S word, savages. Okay, so you weren't even considered human. You were considered subhuman as savage. And of course, then you had the enslaved peoples who had stolen labor, and they were considered subhuman as well as chattel that could be owned and listed in the property, and they could be sold and even killed. So they weren't intended in there. So there were quite a few. It wasn't uncommon to see signs around that said no dogs, no Mexicans, and the N-word was used quite frequently, of course. So to understand the history of that, if you're going to be a dream keeper, you have to be able to understand what came before you, to be able to intentionally intercede and work against that past and create a new present for being a dream keeper that's inclusive of all. Number 4, I'm still on page 3. Have a sincere belief in the dignity of the individual and have compassion and empathy. That a lot of times people think obvious, but it's not as obvious as you think. We're going to come back to that one, okay? Empathy and a sincere belief in the dignity of human beings. Okay, that is critical. That is very critical. As a teacher, you are working with vulnerable learners, and it is very easy to harm them. So we have to keep that in mind. Number 5, have a working knowledge of effective classroom management and the skills of teaching. Okay, now that's probably what you already thought about, right? You're like, I want to know the how-to. Okay, and that is important. It certainly is. Number 6, realize that teaching is both an art and a science. Yes, we need the tools. We need the tools to be able to develop that. Do you remember when you were learning how to do cursive writing, and maybe your teacher, I know I did this as I was a 3rd grade teacher and a 2nd grade teacher, I would be very particular about, I wanted the students to stay within the lines, make the O's needed to be very circular, and I would make them erase it and redo it if it wasn't quite right, because I was trying to get them to develop these very precise foundational skills, and then as they developed those, they went on and developed their own personal style, and they used those tools to write essays and novels and all kinds of things. So that's with this too, is that teaching is an art, but it isn't that it's just willy-nilly. There are basic skills that you need to develop and things that you have to do. But then the teaching is also an expression of yourself. And so therefore, the way that I teach is not a recipe that you can just look at and follow exactly, because it is artistic. It is me. For better or worse, you are not going to be me, and I am not going to be you. Okay, so it is an expression of yourself as a teacher. But you do need certain skills. So skills that I have, there are things like promoting high levels of academic achievement, promoting high levels of cultural competence. There are skills that I can do, that you can do, that we can learn how to do, that it's not a recipe cookbook, but how you put this all together is going to be an expression of yourself. Because I cannot be you. I am the best me, and you are the best you. And I always want you to remember that you are already enough. Okay? You're going to keep learning. You're going to make mistakes, but that is okay. I've been an educator for many years and I still make mistakes and I'm still learning. And the day that I stop learning is the day that I need to stop being an educator. Okay? So I know that I'm enough. I don't have to. I know a ton about African American education, but I never tried to be black. I just have to be me. Does that make sense? So you just have to be you. You are enough. Okay? It's okay that you don't know everything. You don't have to know everything. What you have to do is be humble enough to recognize when you make mistakes and where you need to keep learning, where you need to improve, and be open to improving. But you are enough. Okay? You have dignity, and there is a beautiful presence that you have that no one else has, and you bring that to our profession, and everyone around you will benefit from that if you're willing to share it and be you. Okay, so I'm so glad that you're here because there's not been another you. And so every year for me, for teaching, is a wonderful experience because I get all of these new precious jewels who are so beautiful and have come through so many different experiences to make them who they are. So you are always enough, okay? And last thing on page 3, realize that America is culturally diverse and have a commitment to multiculturalism and pluralism. Sometimes you'll hear people saying things like, the United States is becoming very diverse. Well, actually, we've always been diverse. Yes, we are experiencing high levels of incoming immigration, and we are very diverse. White people will not be the dominant group numerically for very much longer. Our census shows that pattern happening, but we've always been diverse. We've always been multilingual. So that's a rich history that we can tap into. Okay, I'm turning to page 4 on the syllabus, and I want you to look at what our standards are. You're going to be focusing on allowing learners multiple ways to develop learning sensitivity to diverse experiences while holding high expectations for all. Okay, that's school, society, and diversity right there. My children, I have children who are Latino, and I have a granddaughter who's African American. What I want their teachers to know is that being African American and successful in school, that's the way to go. They don't have to be African American or successful in school. They can be both. My children can be Latino and successful in school. I have a grandson who is indigenous and Latino, and I want him to know that he can be himself and successful in school. He doesn't have to be created in his white teacher's image. And maybe he won't have a white teacher, I don't know. But nothing wrong with white teachers. Is the reality is, in our profession, teachers are the overwhelming majority of teachers in public education. It's like in the high 80s percentages are white, and particularly white primary English speaking monolingual women. Okay, so you look at our teacher education courses and you see that we have a lot of white women. Now, I am a white woman. There's nothing wrong with white women. We are fabulous teachers. The thing is that our schools are very, very diverse. And even if we say, well, I teach in a predominantly white area, what that means is that there's a lot of segregation going on, and some areas are predominantly white. That means other areas are predominantly not white. Okay, so a white is also a racial group. So sometimes people will say, well, I teach in an all white area. And my response is, and, you still have racial issues because you have an all white school. So, um, learners should be able to have their culturally diverse values recognized and affirmed while having high expectations for academic achievement. 3.2, future teachers, should be able to be able to collaborate with students to establish a positive learning environment of openness, respectful interaction, support, and inquiry. Okay, that makes sense, right? If students don't feel comfortable and safe in your classroom, it's not likely that they're going to open up and learn with you. So that makes a lot of sense. Future teachers, are supposed to learn to practice a range of developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate instructional strategies to meet the needs of all students. That makes sense, right? Yeah, so you get a lot of students who are coming in, maybe they're acquiring another language. They have a primary language, they're acquiring English. A lot of people in Africa, they will speak 5, 6 languages. So we have to be cognizant of that. Future teachers should be able to adapt and improve your instruction based on reflection and new learning. Okay, so in this course, now I'm on course objectives. Each student, and that's you, each student will explore the role of changing demographics in U.S. public schooling applied to democratic notions of public good, equity, citizenship, positive growth, and development. So we've already talked a little bit about that, right? School, society, and diversity. That public schooling wasn't even intentionally meant for the range of social differences in the United States. And so historically, what has that meant? They have been kept out. So how do we bring them into public schooling so that they can be part of an informed citizenry to participate in our republic as well? So your job is to learn about that. In schools, society, and diversity, that relationship is fundamentally about that. Okay, your job is also to identify and discuss the development, maintenance, and transformation of social diversity versus differences in hierarchies in the society and education. Okay, so that's where we're looking at the development and maintenance of differences versus diversity. We're going to have a whole module on that. So, why is it that men are still being paid more than women? Why is it that girls tend to enter preschool just as excited and interested in science and mathematics, and they show all kinds of eagerness and aptitude, but by the time they get to about 4th grade, girls start going this way, away from math and science and STEM, and they tend to go toward the pink colored things, while boys tend to go toward math and science and STEM. And we see that teachers tend to call on boys more often. So there's all kinds of things going on with that. And so we're going to explore and discuss and look at that so that you don't go ahead and keep recreating those historical patterns of what's come before. So when girls are being funneled away from STEM, and maybe they don't realize that that could be a really good option for them, instead of them thinking, well, I need to be a nurse or a teacher. Not that there's anything wrong with being a nurse or a teacher. There's certainly wonderful things about that. But that they would have the option to be able to explore something else as well. I think, I would have been a fabulous doctor, had someone mentioned that to me. But as a dream keeper, you could open up possibilities so that students could explore those. So that's your second objective. The third one is that you, the future teacher, you're going to define and examine the nature, role, and implications of culture and socialization applied to individuals and groups into learning, development, and pedagogy. Now, I know that sounds kind of overwhelming right now, but by the end of this course, you should be able to talk about that pretty well. And even things like what is a girly thing to do, and why do girls sometimes steer away from math and sciences. That's not just because teachers encourage that, but also because girls are socialized that way. And so that's just one example of that. A lot of girls will end up graduating from high school thinking they're bad at math. A lot of girls do. That's a pattern that we see. And where did they get those ideas? So, again, we're not looking to blame or call anybody bad, but we are going to look at those patterns of socialization and what can we do as educators to interrupt those, to help people to be dream keepers and not dream wreckers. Okay? One last thing here in the syllabus. I'm on page 11. No, I'm sorry. I'm on page 5. The top of page 5, it says professionalism. Failure to adhere to positive class agreements may negatively impact your learning and that of others, and therefore negatively impact your professionalism grade for this course. There's a rubric that's on Canvas that I would like you to look closely at. It's very important that you put this idea of being a professional. You got to be hungry. Like, you're not doing it just because I told you to, or because you know that you're supposed to get a good grade, but because you're hungry. You're like Frederick Douglass. You're starving for knowledge and learning and the power and joy of it. So being professional means that you organize your time so that you get things done. It might mean that you have to maybe get up an hour earlier. It might mean you may need to cut some of your social media time. It may mean that you need to be very strict with yourself about how much binge watching you do. I know I have to watch myself. I will binge watch on Netflix, and I will wonder where the day went. So whatever your situation is, you may have to think about that. And I had a professor when I went to graduate school, and I thought he was a little harsh. It was my first day of graduate school with my first master's degree. I have 2 master's degrees. I have one in education and one in sociology. Excuse me. And my first day of my first master's degree, my professor, I came blasting in. It had been parent-teacher conference, so I was running across the city. I was living in Salt Lake City, and I was blasting across the city from the west side of Salt Lake City to the east side. And I didn't even have a paper and pencil. I'd just come from parent-teacher conferences, blast in, and I sat down, and the professor just looked at me and he was like, okay, how do you come to graduate school with no paper and pencil? And of course I had excuses. I was like, well, I was running late. I had to meet with parents, blah, blah, blah. And he said, Brenda, and this is for all of you. He said, look around. You see all the people in this room? A lot of you, look around. A lot of you won't be here. When it's time to graduate, a lot of you won't be here. So I thought that was kind of harsh. He was telling us that we were going to be filtered out, that not all of us were going to make it. Then the next thing that he said that really shook me to my bones, he said, people will be born and people will die and you will keep on studying. And I thought that was just so harsh. And I actually found it to be true. I had 2 babies during my first master's degree program, and I was still teaching school full time. And so my youngest daughter and my youngest son were both born during my first master's degree. And I just buckled down, and I never missed an assignment. I never missed a class, even though I was in the hospital and had a baby. I did miss marching to get my diploma for my first master's degree. I was in the hospital with my last child there. But I never turned in an assignment late. And I did have to learn to be very strict with my time. I didn't always do all of the things that I wanted to do. Like, I will admit to you that my kitchen floor was not scrubbed as often as I would have liked it to have been. So there were things that I had to let go. There were things that I had to prioritize and be very intentional about. I couldn't risk, putting my children in the background. So I had to be very open and willing to accept help from others, which was a little bit hard for me to do and very humbling. So I had to do a lot of things to make that possible. But I came through graduate school, 2 master's degrees and a doctorate with a straight A record. And I know that you can do it too. I was kind of a sleepwalker through my bachelor's degree. I could have done much better, but I wasn't very intentional. And I wasn't from a family that had any experience in higher education, and I just didn't know. So, but you know, and you're very capable, and you're very brilliant, and you have so many skills, so you will do much better than I did. So I know that about you, and I am here to help you as well. And I think, if I really had understood more specifically about what I needed to be prepared to do as a classroom teacher, a lot of people think that they know what teaching is because they've sat on the student side of the desk for a very long time. So they see teachers in action all the time, and they're experts on that side of the desk, but they don't necessarily know what's happening on this side of the desk, even though they think that they do. So I wish I would have been a little more intentional about that. And I want to support you in becoming very intentional about that. And so I want to tell you a little short story about 2 short stories, and then I'm going to wrap it up. I want to tell you a very quick story about something that happened here in Mobile, Alabama. I was teaching at the University of South Alabama, and I was working with future teachers, teaching a class just like this one. And I had my students out in the schools. And here in Alabama, our public schools are overwhelmingly Black, African American mostly. And then our private schools are overwhelmingly white. We do have some white public schools, but not very many. And so I wanted the future teachers to be exposed to where they were most likely going to teach, which would be in the Black public schools. And so I had one of my students was going to be a high school teacher. And so I put him over in a high school here in Mobile. And so he was a young white man. He was maybe about 24, 25. And just a marvelous young man. And so he goes over to the high school, and it is a school that is like 99% African American, and it's very, very working class. So there's a lot of issues of poverty. There's a lot of issues of class. The principal is just a remarkable educator from a family of educators. He's African American, and he has such connections with the students, the children in the high school. And so I had a placement relationship with him where I would put the university students out in his school so that they could be in a setting that it was of schools, diversity, and society, right? So they were out there in an all-black school, and most of my students were still white. I have some black students, but most teachers are white. So even in Alabama. And so this young man gets out there and he's loving it. He is loving this school. So the principal comes up to him and says, "Hey, how's it going? How have you been enjoying your time here at our school?" And this young man, he says to him, "Ooh, I love it. I can handle these kids. I can handle them." And the principal looked at him and he gently put his hand on his arm and he said, "Son, one thing you have to learn about this school, and anytime you are in a situation like this where it's a lot of diversity, you don't handle the children. You interact with them. You find ways to connect with them, but you don't handle them." Does that make sense? And the young man, he said, "Oh, okay." And it was a pivotal moment for him. And that's really the essence of what it means to have an I-thou relationship. If it's I-thou, then I must treat you as a thou. I have to respect your dignity. You are a precious human being. I don't handle you. If it's an I-it relationship, then it is about handling you. Go over here. And sometimes you do have to be very direct. You have to be like, now is the time for us to sit down and be quiet. But there's a way that can be done without handling people as objects and being disrespectful to them. And one thing that you probably already know, especially with teenagers, is that they don't handle being disrespected well. They know that they are human beings and they want to be treated with respect. And so they should be. So what this principal was doing was he was teaching this future teacher how to shift from being an I can handle these kids. So think about it. This was a white young man who, even though he was from Mobile, Alabama, he had very little experience because white people are the most segregated group in U.S. society. He spent most of his time around other white people, even in Mobile, Alabama. And so if he was around black people, he would be at a grocery store or somewhere where people might say, "Did you find everything you need? Is there anything I can bring you?" But not as like equal partners. So this young man was thinking that he had an image in his head about young black children. And he thought, well, they're going to be little rascals. They're going to be tough. They're going to be little handfuls. And so I got to handle them. And this principal said, no, you don't handle them. No, this is not an I-it relationship. This is an I-thou relationship. You connect with them. You find a way to connect with them. And if they don't connect right away with you, try another approach. It's not that you're trying to trick them into something, but you're trying to build trust with them, make connections with them, find out what makes them tick. They might not trust you at first, and it might take a while to build their trust. And they have to see that you are trustworthy. But that's okay. What's wrong with that? right? We are adults working with vulnerable populations, and they need to know that we are trustworthy. So we have to earn their trust. I have to earn your trust, right? You don't know me, so I have to earn your trust, and you have to earn their trust. And so that's what this principal was teaching him, was this situation about an I thou as compared to an I it. When that young man said, I can handle them, he was thinking about these black children as little budding thugs. He was thinking about them as, ooh, I better handle them or they're going to roll out of control and who knows what kind of hell's going to break loose. No, 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 no. You don't handle them. You connect with them and you teach them and you guide them. It doesn't mean you're their friend per se. It means that you're the adult in the room. They're not in the military. You don't have to treat them like they're incarcerated, but you need to treat them with dignity and respect. And you find ways to connect and they will respond to you. I found that to be true in my own teaching. And that's what I wanted to tell you about as well, is when I was a brand new teacher, my second year of teaching, I was transferred to the west side of Salt Lake City. And I had a lot of students who were English language learners. They were economic refugees. I had some children who were primary speakers of Vietnamese. I had a lot of children in my classroom who were of Polynesian descent. And so I had a lot of diversity in my classroom. And I had been teaching my first semester, I'd been teaching on the east side of Salt Lake, where it was pretty much middle class. I had one child who was of Mexican origin, and his family was learning English as a second language, but just one. And so mostly the children were the children of middle class professionals. And we were reading Stone Fox in second grade and so on. When the second year and I was transferred to the west side of Salt Lake, I was excited. I had been in South America. I had been in Argentina. I had been in Mexico. So I was super, super excited. Other teachers were like, you better buy your bulletproof vest. Yeah, I'm so sorry. You're low person on the totem pole, so you get sent over there. But I was really excited about it. And I pull up with all my books. And the other teachers are like, you're not going to need those. These kids, they don't care about education. They had all these deficit views of the children and their parents. Back to school night, I was like, where's everybody? And the other teachers were saying, well, the families, they don't care about education. But I wasn't believing that, because I had been in South America. I had been in Mexico. I knew that the schools were actually tougher down there than they were in the United States. So I didn't think that it was that they didn't care about education. I thought something must be going on, and I just don't know what it is. So I get to my first day of teaching on the west side of Salt Lake. Now, keep in mind, I'm teaching third grade, not second grade. So I was kind of concerned that my curriculum wouldn't be rigorous enough for the children, because I'd been teaching second grade and now I'm at third. So I'm like, okay, this is a new challenge. I'm excited. So I come in, and the children are all, there, and we're going to start out with some journal writing, because I want to get to know them, and we've just come off of summer vacation, so I want them to write in their journals. And I tell them to write about something that they did this summer. And it's not long before there's like pencils that start to be flying around, journal notebooks are flying around, and it's kind of getting crazy. And so I'm like, well, okay, maybe my directions weren't clear, my instructions. So I give the instructions again, and I tell them I would like them to write something that they did in the summer. And still nothing's really happening. It's kind of chaotic, and I'm not liking this. and I've got 28 little 8-year-olds, and there's a lot of noise and there's not much writing, and so I'm starting to get a little bit upset. And the notebooks are flying again, and so one of the little girls, I still remember her name, is Jessica, and she finally kind of throws her crayon down, and she's like, "We don't know how to write." And so I was like, "What? Okay, this is third grade. They should know how to write. The second graders over across the city, they knew how to write and read." And so, come to find out that they were like, "No, we don't know how to write." Okay, or revamp. I can be flexible. So what I said to them then was, "Okay, go ahead and draw a picture of it, and then we'll put the words in later." Okay, well, that worked out a little bit better. I start going around, and I see that there's some pictures happening, and I'm able to put some text down. And I get back to Jessica's table, and I see very clearly what Jessica has drawn. It's very obvious. She has drawn a picture of herself giving me a certain finger, and I know exactly what that finger is, and I know exactly what it's supposed to mean. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm kind of flabbergasted, because this is my first day of really this situation of teaching with school diversity and society, and I feel unprepared. I am unprepared. Within the first little while, I'm undone by notebooks. My students tell me that they can't write, and then I have pictures of students drawing themselves giving their teacher what is clearly a message of disrespect to me. And so they've had a lot of bad experiences already, even though they're only 8 years old. Come to find out that many of them could not even spell out their full first name and last name. They couldn't write their last names yet, even though they had been in the United States, going to school in the United States from kindergarten, first grade, second grade. This was their first day of third grade in the United States. So the United States schooling, and specifically Utah schooling, was the issue with that they were not able to write their first name and their last name. So I felt very, very unprepared, and really had to regroup, because at that moment, I'm very thankful that I had had so much time in South America and Mexico, because I did not believe that it was the children and the parents. What I thought was I had seen a lot of valuing of education in Latinx communities and countries, and so I figured that something was not connecting in school, and it was probably me, and it was probably their experiences in school before, that they had already, by the time they were 8 years old, had some pretty negative experiences in school, where they were starting to internalize, "I am bad at school. School is bad. And it's a bad experience. I don't like being at school." So they were already learning to imagine themselves as not good at school, and I had to turn that around and help them to see the joy and the power and the beauty of education. And it didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen without mistakes. But we did have a wonderful school year together. My hope in this course is that what we do here in this course will be part of helping you, so that you can enter your own classroom very professional, very prepared to address issues of school, society, and diversity. Okay? Alrighty. Well, log on to Canvas and look around the Start Here module. You have to have everything done for that in the syllabus quiz before you can start Module 1. Module 1 needs to be done by Sunday night. Okay? All right. So watch those rolling deadlines. You have discussion boards, your name story. You have to have your own post by Thursday. You have to respond to 2 others before the weekend. So try to get that stuff in early because once that's in, then the next modules open up and you can kind of get started ahead. Always better to be early, not running up to the deadlines. Give yourself a little bit of fat time where you, in case something with technology or whatever happens, something in your life, you're not running against the clock. Okay? Alrighty. Well, it's wonderful to get to know you. It's wonderful to journey together with you, and I'm so excited to get to work with you. Okay? Thank you.